Then he whipped that horse and says, "You guys are on your own." um, we also have an alert from Meredith that President Biden is going to make an announcement with an apology about the people who experienced the boarding school during those years, and that's going to be at 10:30, and maybe we could break to that too. You know, it's and we'll, Becky's going to be working on that piece there, and see if we can break on that. So, um, that's something I think everybody, whether you've been in the boarding school or not, that's just kind of a historical event that presented itself with a lot of trauma, especially with the generations that pass after. And I'm pretty sure that some of your family members in the past have been associated with boarding schools, attending boarding schools, or some way affiliated with boarding schools. So, and I think some of the trauma that took place, some was really hard, and I think some other places that were not as hard, and a lot more of growth for some of them, for some of the people. So, here's the agenda. I asked Charlene John from Washington School District to present that. Then we'll have our professional development. I guess when we do have that professional development going somewhere around 10:30, um, we may have to break, and we'll watch the. Then we'll continue. We'll continue with the agenda. So let's. If you guys, if someone is, all right, Anne Marie. Anne Marie, could you mute yourself? Okay, thank you. Let's start with uh, a cultural reverence with Charlene. Charlene, are you on? So let's start with you, and we'll go from there.
Yes, I'm on. Let's see, my camera's not working though, but it's okay. There you go. Okay, yeah, Shay Charlene John Dustin. Nash Editopahan Shi Bashin, na Kintachini Dashichedo, na Kaden Edashanala. Ado lay Nadis Ade na shop day, but see the Hansel Gayhodia Ado Dashidi K and Sisako. A kohadi shot toje iltra do lay Kojigo California goda iltra. Hot o Ishigadlas ti Ado, I'll say this in English now for those that don't understand. My name is Charlene John. I'm from Navajo Mountain, a place called the Sagebrush Glades. It's a little area up there. And that's where my footprint came to be. I went to school at Shanto Boarding School and also went to California to Victorville for high school. And then I attended some colleges. And and then the beginning part, I introduced myself as Zuni Edgewater clan, my mother's clan. My father's clan is the Salt People clan, and my paternal grandfather is Mexican People clan, and my maternal grandparents are Red House People clan, and that's who I am. And I just want to say a little prayer for everybody so we can get going. Okay. Nitra hia ashta hon loni dische kudo njona go hinna de credo honche nad hiana delti kon hizad yat ern khati lilto kon ni hinta kes atan jona go nachash ati lilto khatik astiche njona go nase nsite keso nase nachalchen kon da ultra atan lini ban tsite keso ya at hon jona go Sida keston hi ke ehade kato. Di ye chinia bahas tira no hum. Njona gon dakre e di gi yad eho at that deal nilnacha. Ado kon nase njona go alech a date or lilnle. Hat ego shi na nesto to queer goshi gik ehade kaheki. Yat ba at dili to ba kita dil to njono ko ate iki to kagin de big on dil njono tani tindole ado ko nko to njono ko hich yana dal ki dan kha big hon lon njono ni ta doln ado ko njono ko yat heke ba de kestole ado ko njono ko ya ni ke ta to al ado de ni ye Jesus Christ e be shi ben na shta din. Amen.
Hey, thank you, Charlene. That was very great. Great prayer and good feelings from that. Good vibes and all the stuff that go with that. You see the agenda, and again, we're going to go through the agenda with professional development given by Dustin. But at 10:30, you know, it was just brought to my attention that President Biden is going to make a national apology to those American Indians, and specifically for those people who were in the boarding schools during that time. So then after that, we'll get through with the updates, you know, from the Urban Indian Center. And I have a few things that I like to say. Then we'll adjourn, and our next meeting is November the 15th. So with that, I'll stop my screen sharing, and I'll turn the time over to Dustin.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck. So do you just want me to stop at 10:30, or you'll tell me what's up around 10:30?
Yeah, I think Becky could give us that heads up, and then we'll just
Okay.
stop and then, you know, pause. You know, I don't know how long that presentation is going to be, but you know, let's you know, we'll go, you know, go with the flow, man. You
All
know,
right.
you know how
All
that
right.
is.
Yeah, let me share my screen real quick.
Yes,
And
at 10:30, President Biden's going to come on and do an apology to the boarding school kids. So just thought I'd
right.
put you in on it.
Wow. Okay.
Because I was a boarding school kid, and some of the workers that worked the Navajos and some of the other kids have been in that. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Now make sure that everybody's mute.
Can everybody hear me right now?
Yeah, we could hear you. We see
Okay.
your screen also.
Oh, good. All right. So I haven't done this I didn't do this last year, but I thought it'd be appropriate to do this year, and it's just a look at cultural appropriation. I think I like to do these in the fall mainly because Thanksgiving's going to come up and Halloween's going to come up, and this is this is related to that in a little bit in a small way, and so I just wanted to make sure that you had this information. Um, I, I had a hard time figuring out what cultural appropriation was when it first became a thing that people looked for and watched out for and became aware of. And so I thought I could just share a couple things with you to talk to you about why appropriation is something we need to be aware of and how we can avoid doing it. I'll just share this information. I don't like usually reading off my slides, but I think today is a good time to do it. So cultural appropriation is an adoption or use of elements of one culture by members of another culture. That seems pretty clear, but I was able to find a definition that went a lot more and provided more context to what we should look for. And so to keep going, it says the adoption of these cultural elements is done in a colonial manner. That is, elements are copied from a minority culture by its members of the dominant culture, Okay, so it's the dominant culture is getting is using elements of a minority culture's lifestyle, and these elements go outside of their original cultural context. So it's like wearing headdresses at a maybe a fashion show, or wearing headdresses on Halloween, or at a sporting event, something like that, right? Yeah, it's not when headdresses are worn. Turning down your main round right now. Sometimes appropriation isn't is done even when the minority culture asks the dominant culture to stop, right? And that can be a problem. You know, I
Wow. Hey,
where have you
Dustin,
seen it? Yeah.
hey, Dustin, just a second. Let's get these guys to mute themselves. Can you guys mute yourselves? We have a presentation going on.
Yeah.
Uh, Megan Bushnell, could you mute yourself?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Uh, I appreciate it. Thank you. Where have you seen cultural appropriation? You've seen it a couple different places. I pulled these from a magazine that was out there. You see one on fashion shows, lady wearing a hairdress. It turns out Pharrell is actually native, but he's wearing this outside of its context even, and I don't know if he has at the time he was doing this. I don't think he understood the importance of this type of headwear for Native people, and he came out and issued an apology about it, and but did put everyone on notice that he has Native ancestry and things. But it was nice to see that even he would apologize for something like this being worn outside of context. So, why is it an issue? I hear that a lot. Are we really hurting anybody? Is anybody really getting harmed by us doing this? So let's talk a little bit about why this may be an issue. Um, and a couple things. So one reason why it can be an issue is because it trivializes violent historical oppression, right? You you right now you used to be able to see these two professional teams, the Washington Redskins and the Cleveland Indians. These were their logos, these were their mascots, these were their nicknames that the fans used and carried on. And when Native people, questioned, the use of a term redskin, or questioned the logo of Chief Wahoo from the Cleveland Indians, normally the response was, "Hey, we're doing this to honor you. We love our Native American citizens. We love the Native American players that played on our teams. That's why we did these things." But it doesn't, it trivializes, it says it trivializes violent historical oppression because it wasn't always like this. We weren't always respected, and Native people weren't always looked out for and honored in this way. And I share a picture on the right hand side about, the burial after the Wounded Knee massacre, right? It was a mass grave. They dug a deep hole in that frozen ground, and they just start piling people in there. And this was a group of people that had surrendered. This was a group of people that came to the fort for help because they were told that they could get help there. And and for whatever reason, I mean, you'll read a bunch of reasons why the shooting started at Wounded Knee, but the result is always the same. You had so many people killed, women, children, men, all killed and buried in this mass grave, because our history together hasn't always been nice. It hasn't always been one of honor. It hasn't been always been one of mutual respect. And so when you say these things like, "Oh, we're honoring our tribes with these logos, with these nicknames," it almost acts to cover up the past and the previous relationship we had within this country. Another reason why it may not be a good thing to do, because I'll just read this. It lets people show love for a culture, but really not for its people, right? You can remain prejudiced against its people. We'll gladly wear things that symbolize or mean things to Native Americans. We'll wear, some version of your regalia, some version of your face paint, some version of your traditional wear, and we'll live it up and party up and say, hey, we love this part of your culture. But if you look at the picture on the right hand side, this was in Standing Rock when they're laying the Dakota Access Pipeline down. A lot of Native people from across the country, across the world, Indigenous people from across the world, all came to support the Standing Rock Sioux and stopping that oil line going right above their reservation. And the backlash that and they were peaceful protesters. They just stood and held signs and said their, and did their protest chants and things, and they were peaceful. These guys were getting shot with rubber bullets. They're getting, hosed down in the middle of winter with water. They were some of them got hit by police officers or that hired law enforcement that the counties and cities hired to make sure that the pipeline would go in. And the rhetoric that we found on the news stations, right? There weren't a lot of people, supporting this native cause, this cause for health and protection of land. And so you see the a little bit of the hypocrisy there of, we're going to pick and choose what parts of your culture we like, but when it comes to the important things, the things that are that affect our legal system, that affect our tribal sovereignty, you don't always get a lot of support outside the Indigenous community on that. And so the things people were saying about these protesters, how they need to get jobs, how they're, it's just, or, Indians have nothing better to do because they don't work. They all they do is hang out and protest. Those remarks like that. You get those remarks like that, and you set them against like a picture on the left where people will gladly use the portions of culture and Native America that they like, um, but but don't recognize or honor the struggles that they're going through or offer support. So that can be a little uh, uh, a little hard to grasp at some points. Look at this. It says that, appropriation lets privileged people profit from oppressed people's labor, right? So, I grew up as a silversmith with my parents, and we made jewelry down in New Mexico. And I tell you, being a silversmith or being a child of a silversmith, it's not the most lucrative profession out there. There were a lot of times that we really struggled, because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to to put the work in, the detail, the stamping. You see this guy, he's stamping just thick, heavy gauge silver here, and you have to, all that investment you put in your tools, all that investment you put in with your time, and the investment that you have to, the reinvestment into silver supplies and or turquoise stones or coral or whatever stone you're working with. Um, that it's really difficult. Sometimes I don't know if Eileen Quintana is here, but she helps with a program called oh gosh, it was, oh, what is it? I just had a brain collapse right here. But they work with weavers from the Navajo Nation. It costs a lot of money to have sheep, and so to get access to wool, to spin into yarn, to dye all that wool to the colors you need, and to make them uniform so that you can use them on large rugs. I think they said it takes something like close to 375 work hours to complete a 3 foot by 5 foot rug. That's not super giant, but think about 350 hours of work just to complete that piece of art. And you're doing it all by hand. And so you look at this silversmith, and you look at this rug weaver here putting in the time to do this, and then go to your left where you have large companies that will gladly copy those same designs or something very similar, maybe change something really small, and they can mass produce these really fast. Right now there's a lot of people are just, they're not even using silver in their work. They're stamping aluminum or tin, uh, and uh, and they're passing it off as Native American uh, work. And what happens is that when you see if you're wondering, if you see the price difference between a handmade rug or something produced by a silversmith, and you compare it to the prices that big outlet stores put out, and if all you're looking for is a simple design, you can get those simple designs pretty cheap from major stores and markets. Uh, but when you do that, you take away from the time and effort and talent that these artists put in into their own work. All right, it makes it harder for native artisans to sell. It makes it harder for them to provide food and clothing and a roof over the head of their people when their competition can put out uh, knockoff versions of their materials and sell it for way cheaper. I had even simple things. I had a friend in high school, and um, he would he started designing t-shirts, and he'd put native designs, like put a lot of work in these things and get them printed and things, and to be able to open a store and to sell his t-shirts, he had to sell them, at like 25 bucks a piece, 30 bucks a piece for these t-shirts. They're really nice and really cool. But the Walmart in that town started producing t-shirts that were really similar to his, and they were selling them for 6 bucks, right? And so after about 3 months, he was put out of business because people who just want the design, maybe with and not really worry about the time and care it goes into create something like that. They'd rather buy the $6 version than his. So it does allow people to take advantage of that situation, take advantage of the difference in labor and cost for materials, and it really does hurt the native artists on these things. Uh, it also spreads lies about things. I think if you look at this, I think I think you all know who this is, right? I think the on the left you have a drawing that's supposed to symbolize John John Smith uh, and Powhatan and his daughter Pocahontas. And the legend is that she saves him, right? And that they have a romantic relationship, and there's peace between their people or whatever, right? But the reality was that saving was symbolic. Powhatan had a large confederacy, about 16 tribes under him, all and but to come into his confederacy, to be a part of that defensive support, you had to accept Powhatan's protection. And the way you did that was by symbolically um, having him save you. And so when John Smith came out from the Virginia Company, when he met Pocahontas, he was able to figure out the parts of these ceremonies, and so they welcomed him in. They symbolically were going to hurt him. She symbolically goes in to save him. He accepts that help and becomes under Powhatan's protection. Now, at the time, Powhatan's probably thinking, well, now I got a non-Indian town under my confederacy. And the Virginia Company is probably thinking, well, now we just don't have to go to war. And, John Smith is okay with it because his job is to secure peace and make sure everything happens all right. If you go to the middle picture, that is not John Smith with Pocahontas. That's actually John Rolfe. So after this peace agreement came between the tribe and the Virginia Company, usually to secure peace between two bodies. Uh, they let Pocahontas go and live with the Virginia Company to ensure that the tribes wouldn't attack their colony. And while she's there, she converts to Christianity and marries her captor, the person that she was living with, John Rolfe. He ends up taking her back to Europe, to England, and she passes away there from just new diseases that she's exposed to. But you know, there's the how old she was really varies. You know, I've seen ages from 9 to 12 years old that she was at the time, and so and that probably makes sense if you read some of the letters and journals of Christopher Columbus. You know, he talks about selling young native girls to his soldiers, and finding them for the people back in Spain, and how he talks about how 10-year-old girls are the most sought after, right? So it doesn't surprise me if she was under 12, and that this is the practice that was going on. But this is a completely different version of what happened as compared to what Walt Disney tells us, right? Or what short animations we probably saw in elementary school about her contribution to the United States. So you know, it isn't exactly online with what we see in Pocahontas the movie, and her life was a little harder, and the struggle was a little more, and you know, and her passing was real, and was real for her and her people.
Hey, Dustin, I just got a message. And maybe we could turn to Becky now. Maybe we could get that news announcement.
Absolutely.
Uh,
I'll
yeah.
stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let's try that.
yeah, I do
Okay.
have it pulled up. It hasn't started yet, so
Okay. Um, Becky, when it starts, could you just chime in and say, "Hey, get off the line. The news conference is going on." So
right.
let's go that route. Okay. I'm sorry, Dustin. So continue, please.
Okay, let me try that again. Boom. Let's see.
One thing, I was going to give a little input on this. The
Yeah.
question you came up with is why appropriation is so important. I think, from the educational point of view, is psychologically, especially with those young students. Kindergarten through fourth grade. That's where a lot of the mind,
Mm.
the brain starts to form its ideas,
Yeah.
such as their environment, their surroundings, the language, putting things into perspective. And, from fifth grade through around maybe eighth or ninth grade, now they begin to solidify their thoughts and their actions. And once they get into high school, sometimes, that's pretty set in place. So I think psychologically, even the American Psychological Association, indicate that the appropriation for American Indians is really, really detrimental in terms of how, especially the young students in schools, are being sometimes manipulated.
Hmm.
Because I'm sometimes I'm not so sure if teachers do this purposely, but I think it's just that they're unaware. So I think it's our job as Indian educators to make them aware that this psychologically it's harmful. Then once you get into high school, and from that, you get into the adulthood, and they have already set their values. And and then you get the old guards, and you get the old guards saying that, well, that's where you have that quote that you said, well, we want to honor them, that's how we honor them. But it's where the young students who are being affected. So,
Yeah.
that,
And it
so
and
psych,
it's not just the students that are the non-Indian students that are forming values and cultural judgments at this time. It's Native students also. They'll start forming the maybe negative views of themselves that they'll carry into high school too.
Yeah, yeah. So thought I'd throw that in.
I appreciate that, and as a college professor, I do meet some Native students that are, they're not very confident in their background or their lineage, and because of experiences they had early on, they stopped any desire to learn more about their culture or themselves because they didn't want to be too different, or they didn't want to be associated with maybe an incorrect version of their history or their ancestors, and so it's very important. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, the thing that also pops up for me is that, the character, the character is being affected, then from that you have self-worth, self-confidence, self-awareness, self where your surrounding, you become a little bit more aware of what goes on, and sometimes that's being affected too. And so, that's especially the character part.
Yeah,
You get some of these, like your students, some of them they're not uh they're not totally confident of who they are, and the expression that they want to portray as who they are and stuff like that. So
absolutely.
yeah.
um One of the other things I put is, or what I found was that it perpetuates stereotypes. uh the middle here, you have I think you have an Oklahoma basketball team, but they're dressed in headdresses and leather fringe, and you look at how they're dancing in this circle, and it tells younger kids that, hey, this is what it's done. And listen, look at it, it's in Oklahoma, and there's like a totem pole, you know, there's a lot of things going on here. There's a basketball. I'm just kidding. No, the basketball is probably the most authentic thing out of this picture here. I think that's an Indian sport. Um, but look at, if you move over to the right, you see the Boy Scouts and their Order of the Arrow programs, and and even if intentions are good and well, that still there's still there still perpetuates a false narrative of the reality of what Indian culture is, or Indian history is, and Indian living practice is, and so it doesn't it takes away from what in truth really exists. On the bottom here, we have a high school dance team, using a hoop dance. And although we do share a lot of dances with the public, and demonstrate them, to help them feel better, and do things, a lot of our dances are ceremonial. And a lot of the formations you make may have cultural or spiritual significance. And at this high school, there were students that reached out and said, hey, our high school dance team is doing this. How do we make it stop? And the Native community actually reached out and contacted the high school, contacted the school district, contacted the coach of these young ladies that were dancing this, and just said, hey, could you stop doing this? Because it's not appropriate for you to do. A couple of things: you're passing this off as native, and the way you're dressed isn't very native, and it's not as modest as we'd like it to be. The way you paint your face, the way you wear your feathers in your hair, it gives off uh, an incorrect image of who Native people are. And there were some teachers that said, well, let the students voice that, let the students be vocal about that. But they're still trying to find their voice. And in high school, maybe they're, especially if you look at the effect that this had on them growing up, if they're surrounded by these things growing up, they may not be able to express themselves and their emotions and their feelings on this. And they may need your help as adult teachers to help them articulate why they feel like this may not be right, and why something maybe should stop. If you look at the left here, we have Halloween clothes. This is uh, fashioned after the Pocahontas Disney cartoon, but look at that. The, and the name of the name of this costume at the Halloween store isn't Pocahontas. The name of this costume at the Halloween store is Pocahontas, right? They created a a costume that is supposed to elicit, arousal and be a sexy dress, and even for the little kids that are wearing them, and the problem with this is that these ladies, the non-Indian women, or that choose to wear this outfit, after Halloween they just take that off and throw it away, put it in the closet, but that over sexualization of Native women lives long after Halloween. And the people that have to deal with it, that have to put up with it, are actual Native women, actual Native girls, and maybe middle school or high school. They've been sexualized all through Halloween, and they have these views on them. And I think what we're finding out though is that this is true because Native women are are 3 times more likely to suffer sexual assault than any other race of people in the United States, right? 1 in 3 Native women will suffer violent attacks or a violent sexual assault in their lifetime. And so we need to change this image, and we need to make people feel like it's not okay to treat Native women this way. There's whole entire national movements um, that discuss the harm Native women suffer, through the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, or all the way through the Violence Against Women's Act, where they have an entire section dedicated just to domestic violence of Native women. Entire laws that address specifically Native women and their domestic and sexual violence that they suffer. So the harms are real, and they are linked to this, to appropriation and improper use of Native clothing or regalia. And so I just did a I helped my mother-in-law up in Heber or Soldier Hollow, with a school assembly. And my kids, my daughters, we went up there, and we shared some dances with them, but we also gave them, information on why we dress the way we do. We went through different parts of their outfits. We went through my son's grass dance outfit, through the roach he wears on his head, the feathers on his head, the moccasins on his feet. We talked about the elk teeth on my mother-in-law's traditional dress that she wears. We talked about the stories associated with these dances, and we straight up said, these are not costumes. Uh, the designs on these outfits just aren't there because they're pretty. Many of these designs are family designs, much like maybe European coats of arms, where you see these things, you know who's related to who. And so you just don't take designs, much less the entire outfit, without knowing a whole lot of things about that. Or if you're not associated with that family, maybe you shouldn't wear those things. And so I made the point to say that these are not costumes. These are our dance clothes, our dance regalia. The designs on these outfits are have meaning to our family and to our tribe. And so please don't wear these on Halloween. And I was expecting to get yelled at by the principal, but I said it really nice. And afterwards, the teachers and the principals, they came up to me. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for telling us those things. I didn't know, and that's true. A lot of people just don't know. And if you talk to them and share this information in a polite, good way, they'll accept it, and and the chances of them honoring your requests are going to be really good. I appreciate teachers and schools that can pick up on these things and want their kids to be not just smart students but good people, and so I really appreciated that. um you know uh the practice of Native American or American Indian religion wasn't always legal in the United States. There uh, many parts of Indian culture were banned, and people were thrown in jail for practicing them for a long time, just because of misunderstandings of what Native culture or Native spirituality really was. And so, up until 1978, with the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, a lot of Native people were prohibited from doing certain ceremonies, having certain cultural items like rattles or eagle feathers or eagle feather fans, or prohibited from using those things in the ways that they had always used them in the past. But while all this is illegal or banned, we have non-natives, doing the exact same thing and, not having to suffer the legal consequences of doing that. Yeah, you look at native kids that were sent to boarding schools and they weren't allowed to practice their culture. They weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed to be anything Indian, right? We hear it over and over again about Colonel Pratt that ran Carlisle, right? I want to kill the Indian and save the man, and so these cultural practices were no longer done. But now we have non-Indians doing these exact same things out there. I remember my wife and I, we moved to Idaho, and there was this we're like in base, we're close to Boise, and we shared the same valley, and there was a place called Eagle, Idaho, and a lot of really well-off people lived over there. And my one of my friends lived close to there, and he went to church with a lot of the people that were from there. And when they found out that his wife was native, um, they told her, oh, that's so awesome. Do you know we just had somebody come in and bless our house with sage and sweetgrass? And she goes, oh, okay, who did that? What tribe were they from? It was, oh no, they weren't native. They just helped us do it. And she goes, oh, okay. I hope it works out for you. And then they said, yeah, it was the best 10 grand we ever spent. And I was like, what? They paid $10,000 to have somebody come in and bless their house with sage. And I was like, whoa, I would have did it for 5,000. I'm just kidding. No, I didn't say that. But but right, it's a practice of cult. It's a cultural practice that Native people weren't allowed to do for a long time. But it didn't stop non-Indians from doing it. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy there when it comes to that. I do want to share some things. I just don't want to complain. But I do want to say, I'll offer some things that you can do to avoid that, right? To avoid that problem of cultural appropriation. You're gonna run into things, right? For example, I would tell you to support Native artists and designers. These guys, they've invested a lot of what they had to be who they are and to provide the products that they provide. Um, you know, and they sell to non-natives, they sell to non-Indians, and that they'll produce work and art for you to wear and to display that's appropriate. If they didn't think it was appropriate, they wouldn't put it on their websites. They wouldn't put it on their vendor table. They're willing to create things, create art and products that you can wear, that everyone can wear, that everyone can appreciate. And you can find them everywhere. These are just an example of some of the people that are doing art out there, but you can find them all over Etsy and Instagram. If you're really looking for fancy artists and big time artists, get on the SWAIA Santa Fe Indian Market website, and they'll have links to some of the major artists around the country. But this is something you can do. Support the actual Native artists and designers and the things that they're doing. I would say learn more about Native-led movements, right? Learn more about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Learn more about about even athletes in the pro sports and influencers. Learn more about the infrastructure
I think we should
struggles.
do better.
What's that? Maybe it was a mic. We can learn more about everything. There's programs out there. there's nonprofits out there, there's movements out there that support Native people, Native communities, and Native concerns. You just jump on Google and find find these organizations and people where they're at, and maybe they could use your help. Maybe you have an expertise that their organization doesn't have, that their volunteers don't have, and you can pitch in and help and be a part of the solution to this, to help people just learn to get along better. Another thing you can do is you can just call it out. Call it out. Hey, this is wrong because it's wrong. I don't have to give you a cultural reason about why this is wrong. Just as there's human reasons why this is wrong, right? Look at, this is just from a high school or NFL. Kansas City Chiefs will scalp the Redskins, feed them whiskey, and send them to the reservation. Dude, that's just plain up, straight up wrong. You don't want to, you just don't say mean things, don't be mean to people. Uh, and call it out if you see stuff like that. If you see people being mistreated because of it, call it out. If you see signs like this, is old signs, right? This is the old black Sambo, they used to call it. And said, that's super offensive, but really, it was the same drawing that they used for Chief Wahoo, the Cleveland Indians. But the Sambo's wrong, but somehow the Chief Wahoo's okay, right? If something's wrong, if you see the hypocrisy in things, just call it out, and you can do it in a way that isn't, you don't have to argue with people. You can say, hey, you know what? Hey, that this can be damaging to people, and this can cause harm. I understand your affiliation, affinity for your team, but could you not display those things because it can hurt people? Just call it out, if it feels wrong.
Hey,
Support
Dusty, I
company.
think it's on now.
Okay, well, guess what? I'm done. So, so I,
Stop
I,
talking.
I appreciate, the time that you allowed me to have. If you need any information on this to share with you, just let me know. But otherwise, thank you for your time, and I'm going to stay on and watch this with you all.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Dustin. I think if you could send that your PowerPoint to Becky, everything will work out itself. So I guess you log off now. Becky, can you get us all on now? Is there sound to this?
Can you hear it?
No, we can't. Can you get us sound?
It's funny, if you click the link on my chat, it'll pull up a small box and you can actually have the sound through that too. And it's matched to what Becky put up.
Okay, but Becky,
Okay,
did you hear that?
Okay, so I'm sorry, walk me through it.
So
You said to open the.
open
I might
chat.
click. Yeah, I'm in the chat. I'm seeing your link.
So not the PBS link, but the NBC link. If everyone just pushes on that, it'll open another window, and then that has sound. If you're not able to figure out sound on your end. They're just playing Blackbird by the Beatles right now.
Okay. Can you say the directions again, Meredith? I miss what you said.
Well, let's see. So she's on NBC right now on YouTube. So what should be able to happen is your sound should be able to work, Becky. If you look on your speaker option, you should be able to turn the volume all the way up.
I was thinking, if somebody someone can hit the NBC option and then share their screen, would that work?
Yeah, that would work.
I'm gonna give it a try. Is that okay, Chuck, to share my
Sure.
screen?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Can you all hear it?
No.
No.
Okay. I guess that doesn't work.
Yeah, at this point, I'm not proud. Whatever way we can get it to work is good by me. How about this?
You hear it now.
Yeah, we hear it now. Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
They said some good music.
I think they're on the Gila River Reservation. I have a friend who's doing the security for all of it today. So I'm getting all these multiple texts. Do you know this person? Do you know this person? I'm like, I don't know.
Hey, Meredith, you can give us play-by-play. How's that?
I actually just, for my other work, American Indian Services, I think they want me to talk to Box 13 after the apology, just to get, our reactions. This will be interesting.
Yeah, I think, Meredith, I think it would be interesting, to get an exact count how many of our Title VI coordinators have been experienced a boarding school, attending boarding schools.
Dr. Foster, were you in a boarding school?
No, I was raised in the public school the whole time. So, but I did teach at a boarding school. Also, I was a principal at a boarding school. A little different from public school settings, both community, parents involvement, curriculum, and student movement. They were really, really different between the two groups.
I'm wondering when the BIEs came in and started running those schools.
What was that again?
I just said I'm wondering when the Bureau of Indian Education came in. Like, when was that created? When did they take over those boarding schools?
Oh, I think they've always been involved in that whole process. When they established, before the BIA, it was the department. They were fixed within the Department of War. That's where that Pratt, they made his announcement. You save the human and kill the Indian. His concept was the war approach. In years past, and they switched that over to affairs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs. So even now, today you have two branches, the BIE and the BIA. So.
Maybe you should just interview Dr. Foster. You should take this interview.
No, I don't think so, I might say something that I'm going to regret.
Well, I'll be on my best behavior, I promise.
We'll support you on that. Maybe President Biden's on the wrong reservation.
That's awesome.
Well, my friend that does the security said that they're giving Biden some medicine. So I'm wondering if it's hot or if he's just like not feeling well. Hope everything's
Well,
okay.
maybe he needs to be smudged down, You're running around. Who can
Maybe.
smudge him?
I have a question on the cultural appropriation that we just had the presentation.
Mhm.
We talk about how cultural appropriation is done by non-natives. What is the opinion of other tribes doing adopting other tribes' traditions and cultures and like their artwork and designs. What
You know,
for an example, I usually travel around to different powwows, and a couple years ago, I went down to the Denver March powwow, and my regalia represents my family and my tribe. And so I was getting ready in the restroom, and this other lady, she was, well, it's a younger girl, she came in and she was getting dressed as well, and she had this really nice beadwork. And so this lady, an elder, she comes out and she looks at her regalia and says, "Oh, that's really beautiful. I like your beadwork." And the girl goes, "Yeah, thank you." She said, "My grandma was the one who beaded it." Oh, so she's like, "Okay." She goes, "That's a crow design. Are you crow?" And the girl says, "No, I'm not crow." She says, "I'm Danae." And so the lady's like, "Okay, so do you have crow family?" And she said, "No, this is just what my family had beaded for me." And she says, "Oh." And she said, "But your family doesn't have any designs that they could make into beadwork for you." And the girl goes, "I'm not sure. I'll have to ask my family." And so then the girl stepped out of the restroom, and the elder said, "How do you know where you come from if you don't represent your own tribal designs and your knowledge, reflecting from your regalia?" And she said, a lot of tribes now are starting to adopt different tribes' designs because they like them. It's a popular design. And I kind of see that in powwows now. There's like specific designs going around that it's popular. And so how do we go about explaining that to others?
you know, this is my take on that. You know, being born and raised on the reservation, my dad was a code talker as well as a powwow. He followed the powwow scene and the powwow circuit. You know, the thing I learned from him was that it's authorized. The authorization is given to that person by another individual. Sometimes they call that adoption, or they call that authorization for them to display their design. You know, that design coming from the tribe, or maybe coming from a membership of that tribe, or even from a family from that tribe. So you know, when I see the dancers out there, that's my rationale. There was authorization from someone to give that to that individual, and that individual now is displaying their design. And some of those designs, you know, they're family designs, and sometimes they're designs that there's a vision that was seeking. Well, they were seeking a vision. Maybe it came to them in a vision. So you know, along the way, it's spiritually, it's carried on. Now, I can't speak I can't speak for, just picking up a design and then using it. It has to be originated from somewhere. So, like with my dad, he was going to these uh, powwows, and he picked up here and there, but he was a head uh, men dancer a long time. So he picked up a lot of these designs from those people. And of course he's always had his foundation as the Navajo. So his foundation, his central emblem was the Navajo tribe. And then he bead, well, he worked, his design around that. So um, so I that's what I know. So that's I don't know if I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, I understand that because I've been to ceremonies where regalia has been given out to a person that they had adopted into their family that may be from another tribe. So I've seen that, and I know what you're talking about. But I think in a way, for the little girl, for the girl, it should have had been explained to her that, well, we got this because of this and this and this. What you had said, and instead of being like, oh, I don't know, and stuff like that. But I can see both sides. But being around elders, because I grew up with my grandparents, they're the ones that taught me a traditional lifestyle. But I also blend in a lot of modern things into it. But I can see how as a young girl you can be intimidated when an elder comes up to you and you just kind of like freeze and don't know what to say, or if you might say something that might offend them. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I kind of felt bad for the girl because I was like, "Aw." And
Well,
but the
I
grandmother,
think personally, I think that should have been a teaching moment for the elder to talk to the young girl. Because again, I think maybe that young girl, she's just barely fitting into a powwow scene or fitting into her age group or fitting into the young woman's ship. And then you have an older lady, that's there's a little bit of teaching there that this is something that is very sacred, and this is the way you go about it, and blah blah blah. So I think there's a good opportunity for a teaching moment for the elder, and a good teaching reception, if you will, for the student. So
I also think it's kind of a new topic that probably is going to be explored soon within our own, indigenous communities. Because there's the ribbon dress. A lot of women wear ribbon dresses now. And so there's been a lot of discussion. It's like, well, especially among Navajo people, I've heard different things like, well, that's not our traditional wear. So why are we wearing ribbon dresses? But I mean, it's a good topic, and it's definitely one that I think that a lot of people are exploring now.
mhm. Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you, Meredith, because the ribbon skirt and the ribbon dresses were made back then, like back in before the 1800s, because that's when ribbons started coming from the Europeans. So they traded with the tribes in the East Coast, and so they traded beads and the big trade beads, and then became materials started coming in, and ribbons started coming in. And so it started from the East Coast and kind of made a wave throughout the Indian country all the way to California. And then there are some tribes who do have ribbon skirts are made for only ceremonies, like spiritual ceremonies, and was not supposed to be out. It was supposed to be stayed within the tribes. But now what I'm seeing with younger people is trends. It's trendy to wear a ribbon skirt at an event or at a powwow. It's becoming a norm. And my thing is, maybe you might not agree with me, but my thing is, if we're doing the norm, if we're doing trending of what's happening now, I think we kind of start to lose our meaning of these things that our people have, and keeping it sacred. And so when I teach my culture classes, I let the kids know, some things are not a trend. It's not a now thing. It's always been there before we were born, and it's always going to be there after we're not here anymore. And so I teach like you need to have a different outlook. Like it's not a trend. It's not the fashion now, but to understand where this originated from, why did they do it? And so, and then that one thing I gave a good example about was the dream catcher. You see it everywhere. And even in other countries, you see it. And so the basic meaning behind that, because it's trendful, is, oh, it's supposed to catch bad dreams. It's not only that, but it used to be used as in a ceremony with the Lakota people. And when somebody does a presentation who is not of that tribe and says, oh, well, it's like a generic type of answer or a teaching with it, like this catches bad dreams. No, there's ceremonies with it. And I went to a presentation where it wasn't a person of the Lakota people who did the dream catchers with the community. And there was actually a family of Lakota people that were there. And they asked them, so this person that's giving this presentation, is it meeting with what your tribe says about dream catchers? And they were just like, well, some of it, yes, but then it's more of a spiritual thing that we use dream catchers for. And and then they talked about the originality and that when they make it, it's not so perfect. Because they said when you look at a spider webs are not so perfect. And there's little things they put in there representing stars and stuff. And so it was interesting. So when I teach a class, I'm not a know-it-all. And so I don't mind people stepping up and saying, hey, you're explaining it right, but not all the way right. Because I did have a Hopi elder. She was in one of my youth classes, and we were talking about pottery and how the Southwest tribes are known for their pottery, and the creation of it. And I said, myself, I love the pottery. It's just I'm not familiar with the designs. And so she stepped up and said, well, this is the rain cloud, and went on and on. And she goes, oh, I'm sorry, didn't mean to, jump up. And I said, no, you're fine. I said, because I don't know all about it. So tell me, talk to me. And so she did. She took over. I didn't mind because she's the expert. And she gave a good presentation. So I kind of think like this younger people really have to understand that our ways are just not a trend.
Yeah, you're right. I got a little note from someone. Let's continue with our program because I know you guys are busy. And I'm just going to walk through this real quick. And for those people who want to log off and log back on to your private viewing of the presentation from President Biden, I think that would be better with what we have here. The NIEA conference that we had last week. And is there anybody who would like to share? Maybe one or two would like to share your session and just a brief overview of what you experienced there.
I can share.
Okay.
This is Meredith. So it was a really good conference. I felt like, it was held in Palm Springs, and it was really good. I felt like the takeaway for me, I think that Educators Day is such an incredible event that they put together right before the conference starts. I felt like they just get better every year. So as far as the entirety of the conference, I thought it went really well. I felt like a lot of the sessions that I was attending, there was a big push towards, there's always the talk of decolonizing curriculum, decolonizing history, decolonizing the books that we read. So that was definitely a big piece. There was big focus, I feel, on literature for Native American youth. And that was really neat because they were giving out books. And so if you came, I came home with a ton of books. I really enjoyed all of the sessions. The one that I felt really was important to me was the higher education piece, where they talked about kind of a warning for a lot of higher ed colleges. Um, Basically, you know, they said the devil's in the details. So don't like get students all excited about getting free tuition for college. They need to read the fine print, because not all colleges function all under the same process of giving out those tuition waivers or those tuition scholarships. And so I personally felt like that was something I needed to hear for sure, because I experienced it myself. I had a senior who went to the University of Utah, and about 4 weeks ago, they told us that um, they told my son, they didn't tell the parents, but they told my son that they wouldn't be able to cover all of the Native students' tuition. So any kind of scholarships they get with Navajo Nation or, you know, COBEL or any other scholarship is going to apply to their tuition first. And then if there's any leftover, they will pay for it, which is what I was not communicated to me in the application or the news, you know, that announcements. And so that was surprising. So we were under the last minute, you know, a last minute situation where it was like we had to find some loans for him. So when I brought that up, they said, yeah, this is happening in a lot of states, because I think budgeting is a proposed budget, but when you're actually working on those budgets, you don't realize, you don't think about how many students are going to be applying for those colleges. And this year, I think it was like a record year for the U and Native students. So I think that they kind of had an oversight, and realizing they didn't have enough funds to cover it, they kind of said, oh, you know what? This is what's going to happen. So I think for me, I would have rather have known there were, because he would have qualified for 2 other scholarships through the U. And I didn't apply to them because we thought he would just use the Native American one. So now I have a student, you know, who's under student loans, and you really have to pay attention. And when we're guiding our students, really make sure that you're understanding those terms on those tuition waivers, because not all of them are free. Like they can change. They can change those at any minute. So that's my warning to everybody, is just be careful, really look into it, because you don't want to be in a situation. I've already heard at the U, I think there's 4 Native students that had to drop out because they couldn't afford it. So just be aware of that. It can be a scary, you know, situation to be in, especially if you're a Native student traveling and moving to a new state and hoping on that premise that you're coming to get your tuition covered. And that's really not what's happening in a lot of places. So just heads up and a warning, just be careful.
Okay. Anybody else would share with the conference, the NIEA conference?
I went, but my suggestion is not going to go as long as what I stated before about regalia. Let's see. About I'm not sure if Meredith went to, if we were in the same workshop, but I did attend one with the 2 ladies, and they did talk about looking for like making sure your literature, if you're a teacher, that your literature is correct and that it's not biased, basically. And so they gave really good examples about looking at one story, but looking at it in 2 different ways. So they gave an example of Custer, how the person who wrote about him made him into a hero because he defeated Sitting Bull. So they made him this really like a big hero and everything like that. Whereas when another person wrote about the battle, or wrote about him, talked about how his character was, and that they didn't call the area the Battle of Little Bighorn. They called it the Greasy Grass, I think, because that's what the Sioux had called that area where they
Yeah.
had the battle. And so I thought that was pretty cool because
Yeah.
they brought that up, and then they talked about for teachers, if you're Googling Native Americans, like if you want images and you Google it, she said you have to look at it because it basically puts all the tribes in one pool. And so if you're
Yeah.
not specifically putting in which tribe you're looking for, it just throws out a bunch of pictures. And she said,
Yeah.
and when you look at it, oh, I guess it's on. So
Okay. Hey, I just got a note that Biden now is at the podium. So Becky, could you switch us over, please? We need the sound. Oh, maybe I misspoke.
See if I can get this to work.
I
I
think we
already
need to
said to refresh the link.
refresh the link.
And sorry about the ad. I have music going on mine. Can you hear it?
No.
Yeah.
They're just pulling our legs now.
They're doing what?
Pulling our legs. He's just going on and off and on and on.
Well,
Somebody text me, this is Anne Marie. Somebody text me and said he's on Indian time.
that's a good one. He must be really Navajo, huh?
I could share a little bit about what I thought at NIEA, Dr. Foster, while
Okay.
we're waiting.
Okay.
I took a lot of courses about learning from your elders, and I just realized that was such a big piece. Uh-oh, I'll stop. But learning
Okay.
from your elders was a big thing for me.
Yeah. Okay, Becky, we need sound.
Yeah, I'm trying to recreate how I did it last time, and
Yeah.
I guess I need to go back to school and learn this. I apologize, everyone.
Do we have closed caption on this? Maybe if we can't catch it live with the voice, we can have closed caption.
I can share my sound.
Yeah, could you?
Yeah,
Can you hear that?
No.
Huh. Can you hear that?
No.
No. Oh.
Very good. Okay, I hear it.
Thank
now.
you.
We hear it.
I love you too. Thank you. Wow. That was awesome. Thank you, Susanna, so much. There's no question that your voice is out there and representation truly does matter. Guatsi haupa duhiname etzakuitsa shuimi hanu, ziatimai shuimi hanu. Good morning, relatives and friends. It's such an honor to be here today to join all of you on this important day. Governor Lewis, thank you so much for your amazing and wonderful hospitality. I'm so happy to be back at the Gila River Indian community. Today, we welcome President Joe Biden to the ancestral homelands of the Pima and Maricopa peoples. Every day, but particularly today, I think of the ancestors. We are here because they persevered. Their stories, our stories, are everywhere, in the air we breathe and the land we walk on. We tell those stories because Native American history is American history. President Biden has been a champion for Indian country, committed to doing what is right for our people. It is the honor of my lifetime to serve a president and an administration that truly sees Indigenous people and has worked tirelessly to address the issues in Indian country that have long been underfunded and outright ignored. From infrastructure to education to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, Joe Biden has directed historic resources into the hands of tribal leaders who know best how to strengthen their communities. For much of this country, boarding schools are places where affluent families send their children for an exclusive education. For Indigenous peoples, they served as places of trauma and terror for more than 100 years. Tens of thousands of Indigenous children as young as 4 years old were taken from their families and communities and forced into boarding schools run by the U.S. government and religious institutions. These federal Indian boarding schools have impacted every Indigenous person I know. Some are survivors, some are descendants, but we all carry the trauma that these policies and these places inflicted. This is the first time in history that a United States Cabinet Secretary has shared the traumas of our past, and I acknowledge that this trauma was perpetrated by the agency that I now lead. For decades, this terrible chapter was hidden from our history books. But now our administration's work will ensure that no one will ever forget. Over the past 3 years, Interior's Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative has shed light on this horrific era of our nation's history, a federal agenda to assimilate and eradicate Native peoples. My maternal grandparents were only 8 years old when they were stolen from their communities and forced to live in a Catholic boarding school until the age of 13. My great-grandfather was also taken, sent by train thousands of miles away from our small village of Mesita. Many children like them never went back home, and I mourn their passing alongside you. Others, like my grandparents, did return home, and I stand on their shoulders today. As part of the boarding school initiative, we published an investigative report that found loud and unequivocal truth that the federal government took deliberate and strategic actions through boarding school policies to isolate children from their families and steal from them the languages, cultures, and traditions that are foundational to Native people. But as we stand here together, my friends and relatives, we know that the federal government failed. It failed to annihilate our languages, our traditions, our lifeways. It failed to destroy us because we persevered. The investigative report calls on the federal government and Congress to take concerted actions to continue the work of healing from our shared past. And already we're putting some of those recommendations into action. Through our interagency effort alongside the Departments of Education and Health and Human Services, we are investing in the preservation of Native languages. We are developing a 10-year national plan guided by tribal leaders and Native language teachers, which will be released soon. The painful loss of our Indigenous languages has been a consistent topic as we have met with survivors across our nation, from Hawaii to Michigan to right here in Arizona. We are also continuing to ensure that our stories are told so that future generations will understand the impacts and intergenerational trauma caused by the boarding school policies. Assistant Secretary Brian Newland and I spent more than a year on what we called the Road to Healing, 12 visits to Indigenous communities, including Gila River, that allowed survivors and descendants to share their boarding school experiences and the aftermath those schools left behind. In collaboration with the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, and with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Mellon Foundation, we are creating an oral collection of first-person narratives from boarding school survivors. We are finalizing agreements between the department, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, and the Library of Congress to explore how those oral histories can best become part of upcoming and far-reaching educational resources, such as online, traveling, and long-term exhibitions that will share the history and legacy of the federal Indian boarding school system with the world. So many of you have been crucial to this process. That includes the Interior Department staff, many of them Indigenous and here today, who worked through their own trauma to support this initiative. And I am incredibly grateful to my staff for everything they have done from the time this administration started. Today's event would not have happened without each and every one of you, without those who have spoken up, who have shared their pain and who have been vocal in the face of injustice. Together, we have persevered. It means everything to be with you today and with our courageous president who recognizes the impact these policies have had on each of us. Today is a day for remembering, but it's also a day to celebrate our perseverance. In spite of everything that has happened, we are still here. We are here healing our souls and carrying the strength of those who came before us. We are still here in prayer and ceremony, and we are still here doing our best to speak our languages, even if our parents were afraid to teach us, because that's how we honor those who sacrificed so that we could all be here today. Indigenous peoples have always been here, and today we commit to our shared future. Thank you, Mr. President, for bringing us together. Dawa. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Please welcome President Joe Biden, accompanied by Governor Stephen Lewis.
Skeksiatic. I am Stephen Rowe Lewis, Governor of the Gila River Indian Community. Tribal leaders and distinguished guests, it is with honor that I welcome President Joe Biden to the Gila River Indian Community. My earlier words describe the many contributions that President Biden has made to our tribal nations with investments, saving lives, changing communities. I know I speak for everyone when I say that we've never had a president and vice president who have done more for Indian country. And we can never forget the incredible heart, his Ibadak, of the First Lady. We're here today to acknowledge the past and to take the first difficult but necessary steps to begin the healing. Because today is as much about our future as it is our past. All of us present today are joined in spirit by those who did not survive the unimaginable. We offer our prayers to those who did not survive. And we offer our heart, our ibadah, to those who did, as we admire their strength. It's not surprising that President Biden, a person of unparalleled compassion, impeccable character, and profound empathy, would be standing with us today on Atham Juvat, on Indian country. Each of us understand the solemn nature of this day, of this moment, of this historical time and place that we are all a part of. Today's words will be carried forward by all of us here, Mr. President, into future generations. This is a day built on respect and honor. We all know today, Indian country is much stronger because of the words and actions and the heart, the ibadah, the heart of President Biden. On behalf of the Gila River Indian community, I introduce to you President Joe Biden. Thank you, sir. We love you. We love you. Everything you've done.
I'm Joe Biden. I'm Jill Biden's husband. Gov, thank you for the introduction. And to the Gila Indian River community, the Gila, nothing wrong with me, Gila River Indian community for welcoming today. You know, I say this with all sincerity. This, to me, is one of the most consequential things I've ever had an opportunity to do in my whole career as President of the United States. It's an honor, a genuine honor to be in this special place on this special day. Thank you to Senator Mark Kelly, a great friend who also was married to an incredible woman who was my friend. Please have a seat, by the way. Congressman Greg Stanton. I saw Greg when I came in. He's over there somewhere. Greg, thank you. And I'm putting these glasses on because I'm having trouble seeing this. And all the elected leaders and the tribal community leaders for being here today. You know, I can't tell you what a special thanks I have for Deb Haaland, my Interior Secretary. I was determined. I made a commitment when I became president that have an administration that looked like America. Except you're America. And there's never has been a Native American, an indigenous person who was in the cabinet or in the secretary's job or any consequential job in a presidential administration. She's the first, but clearly not the last Native American cabinet secretary ever. And her historic and dedicated leadership to strengthen the relationship between the tribal nations and the federal government is unlike anything ever happened before. That's why we're here today. You know, when I got to the Senate, I was only 29 years old. I had to wait 17 days to be eligible. And after I got elected, while I was waiting, my wife and daughter were killed. My 2 boys were badly injured. And the guy that came to my assistance was a guy named Danny Inouye. And the first thing he taught me, not a joke, was, Joe, it is not Indians, it's Indian nations. No, I mean, he was serious, deadly earnest about it. It's been 10 years since the sitting president came and visited Indian country. That's simply much too long. That's why I'm here today, not only to fulfill my promise to be first president to visit Indian country, but more importantly, to right a wrong, to chart a new path toward a better future for us all. I'm also here today because, as I said, my wife Jill has been here 10 times in the Indian country, literally. The First Lady sends her love and said, Joe, make sure you come home. Because every time she goes, she spent a lot of time, excuse me for saying this, the Navajo Nation. I'm worried. Every time she goes, I'm worried she's not coming home. I watched that beautiful performance just now and it moved me deeply. It's a reminder of everything Native people enjoy and employ. Sacred traditions, culture, passed down over thousands of years. Long before there was a United States, and Native communities flourished on these lands. They practiced democratic government before we ever heard of it. Developed advanced agriculture. Contributed science, art, and culture. But eventually, the United States was established and began expanding, entering treaties with sovereign tribal nations. But as time moved on, respect for tribal sovereignty evaporated, was shattered, pushing Native people off their homelands, denying their humanity and their rights, targeting children to cut their connection to their ancestors and their inheritance and their heritage. At first, in the 1800s, the effort was voluntary, asking tribes to sell their children, to send their children away to vocational schools. But then the federal government mandated the removal of children from their families and tribes, launching what's called the Federal Indian Boarding School era. Over a 150-year span, 150 years, from the early 1800s to 1970, one of the most horrific chapters in American history. We should be ashamed. A chapter that most Americans don't know about. The vast majority don't even know about it. I was at my hotel today. I told the hotel staff they're leaving. I said, where you go? I told them. So what are you doing? I told them. They said they're natives here. They said, I never knew that. I never knew that. Think of how many people don't know. As president, I believe it's important that we do know. You know, generations of Native children stolen, taken away to places they didn't know, with people they never met, who spoke a language they had never heard. Native communities silenced. Their children's laughter and play were gone. Children would arrive at schools, their clothes taken off, their hair that they were told was sacred was chopped off, their names literally erased, replaced by a number or an English name. One survivor later recounted her days when taken away. She said, quote, my mother, standing on that sidewalk as we loaded into a green bus, I can see the image of my mom burned into my mind and my heart where she was crying. Another survivor described what it was like at the boarding school. I quote, when I would talk in my tribal language, I would get hit. I lost my tongue. They beat me every day. Children abused, emotionally, physically, and sexually abused, forced into hard labor. Some put up for adoption without the consent of their birth parents. Some left for dead in unmarked graves. And for those who did return home, they were wounded in body and in spirit. Trauma and shame passed down through generations. The policy continued even after the Civil Rights Act, which got me involved in politics as a young man, even after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. It continued. All told, hundreds and hundreds of federal Indian boarding schools across the country Tens of thousands of Native children entered the system. Nearly 1,000 documented Native child deaths, though the real number is likely to be much, much higher. Lost generations, culture, and language, lost trust. It's horribly, horribly wrong. It's a sin on our soul. I'd like to ask, with your permission, for a moment of silence, as we remember those lost and the generations living with that trauma. After 150 years, the United States government eventually stopped the program. But the federal government has never, never formally apologized for what happened until today. I formally apologize as President of the United States of America for what we did. I formally apologize. And it's long overdue at a tribal school in Arizona, a community full of tradition and culture, and joined by survivors and descendants to do just that. Apologize, apologize, apologize. Rewrite the history book correctly. I have a solemn responsibility to be the first president to formally apologize to the Native peoples, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, Native Alaskans, and federal Indian boarding schools. It's long, long, long overdue. Quite frankly, there's no excuse that this apology took 50 years to make. The federal Indian boarding school policy, the pain it has caused, will always be a significant mark of shame, a blot on American history. For too long, this all happened with virtually no public attention, not written about in our history books, not taught in our schools. Let her talk. Let her talk. Oh, no, let her go. There's a lot of innocent people being killed. There's a lot of innocent people being killed, and it has to stop. For those who went through this period, it was too painful to speak of. For our nation, it was too shameful to acknowledge. But just because history is silent doesn't mean it didn't take place. It did take place. While darkness can hide much, it erases nothing. It erases nothing. Some injustices are heinous, horrific, and grievous. They can't be buried, no matter how hard people try. As I've said throughout my presidency, we must know the good, the bad, the truth of who we are as a nation. That's what great nations do. We're a great nation. We're the greatest of nations. We do not erase history. We make history. We learn from history. And we remember so we can heal as a nation. It takes remembering. This formal apology is a culmination of decades of work by so many courageous people, many of whom are here today. Survivors and descendants, allies and advocates, like the nation's Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And all of you are part of that. Stand up. Stand up. As my grandfather would say, you're doing God's work. Another courageous leader who spent decades shining a light on this dark chapter. And leaders like Secretary Howland, whose grandparents were children at one of those boarding schools. U.S. Interior Department, the same department that long ago oversaw federal Indian boarding schools. Guess what? The extensive work on the breaking ground has happened with her. It's appropriate that she is bringing an end to what that very agency did. Groundbreaking report. documenting what happened. We owe it to all of you across Indian country the truth. Truth must be told. The truth must be heard all across America. But this official policy is only one step toward and forward from the shadows of failed policies of the past. That's why I've committed to working with indigenous communities across the country to write a new and better chapter in our history, to honor the solemn promise the United States made to tribal nations to fulfill our federal trust and treaty obligations. It's long, long, long overdue. And I say this with all sincerity. From day one, my administration, Jill and I, Kamala, Secretary Howland, our entire administration have worked to include indigenous voices in all we do. Along with Secretary Howland, I've appointed Native Americans to lead across the federal government. I signed a groundbreaking executive order to give tribes more autonomy to make your own decisions, requiring federal agencies to streamline grant appropriations and applications, to co-manage federal programs, to eliminate heavy-handed reporting requirements. It's about representing your autonomy. And I might add, it's a hell of a lot more efficient when you do it too. Folks, I'm proud to have reestablished the White House Council on Native American Affairs, relaunched the White House Tribal Nation Summit, and taken historic steps to improve tribal consultation. With the historic laws I've signed, we're making some of the most significant investments in Native communities ever in American history. It's part of my Invest in America agenda, and it's helping all Americans from every state and every tribe, and that's good for all America. Helping Native communities get through the pandemic with vaccine shots in arms and checks in pockets. I'm proud this helped cut child poverty in Native communities by more than 1/3. I'm proud our economic plan has created 200,000 jobs for Native Americans. Record low employment in Native communities. With the strong support from Secretary Howland and all of you, we're finally modernizing tribal infrastructure, for God's sake. Building new roads, new bridges, delivering clean water, affordable high-speed broadband in every Native community, and so much more. Folks, we're just getting started. We're making historic climate investments in clean energy, conservation, clean water, Native communities, including co-stewardship of our land and waters. We just designated the first national marine sanctuary proposed by indigenous communities, which is off the coast of California. We just got that done. And I've restored and designated multiple national monuments to honor tribal nations, including the ancestral footprint of the Grand Canyon right here in Arizona, where I had the honor of visiting. It's breathtaking. It was breathtaking. I secured the first ever advanced funding for Indian health services, so tribal hospitals can plan ahead, order supplies, hire doctors, and know that the money will be there. We're also preserving ancestral tribal homelands, restoring salmon and other native fish, recognizing the value of indigenous knowledge and languages, especially those damaged in the boarding school era. In fact, my administration was proud to defend the Indian Child Welfare Act. An act that was passed in 1970 in no small part to remedy the harms of 150 years of taking Native children away from their families. But, as you all know, that act was challenged just a few years ago in the summer of 2023. Those who opposed us challenged on the ground that Native families should not have priority over everyone else in adopting Native children. Well, I took that all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won. We won. We also extended mental health programs through the Bureau of Indian Education so young people have the tools to end cycle of generational trauma. As an educator, this is something Jill cares deeply about, my wife, just as she traveled across Native communities to increase access to health care and so much more, including helping open the first cancer cure center in Navajo Nation. More to do, a lot more to do. By the way, the infrastructure bill is over $1 trillion. It's not a decade. I mean, it's just not a quarter. It's going to be there for a decade. Much, much more to come, and you've got to get your fair share. By authorizing the Violence Against Women Act, an act that I took great pains in writing 30 years ago, we also reaffirmed tribal sovereignty, expanded tribal jurisdiction in cases where outside predators harm members of your nation. And as we mark Native American History Month in November, this November, we recognize the contributions of indigenous people to American history. You are the first Americans. I might add, you're among the most patriotic Americans. Oh, that's a fact. The whole America should know, all Americans should know, indigenous people volunteer to serve in the United States military 5 times more than any other single group. 5 times. 5. Many having paid the ultimate sacrifice in every war since our founding. To all of you, thank you. Thank you for serving in so many ways as first responders, artists, entrepreneurs, educators, doctors, scientists, and so much more. Sharing your culture and your knowledge for the good of future generations. Believing in possibilities. Possibility to usher in a new era to a nation-to-nation relationship grounded in dignity and respect. It matters. My dad used to have an expression, Joey, everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity. Everyone's entitled. He meant it. Well, let me close with this. It's about restoring your dignity. I know no apology can or will make up for what was lost during the darkness of the federal boarding school policy. But today, we're finally moving forward into the light. As President of the United States, I've had the honor to bestow our nation's most prestigious medals to distinguished people and organizations all across America. That includes Native Americans who survived the boarding school era. Early in my term, I bestowed the Medal of Freedom, our highest civilian honor, on a man, my grandfather, who was an Irish immigrant and was not treated very well because he was an Irish Catholic in the coal mine era in Scranton. But he went on to be an All-American football player at Santa Clara. And every time they talk about All-Americans, he'd say, Joey, the greatest athlete in American history is Jim Thorpe. Oh, I'm serious. I knew a lot about Jim Thorpe before some of you probably even knew. As a child, Jim was taken from his home, but went on to become one of the greatest athletes ever in all American history. And earlier this week, I bestowed 2 other revered medals, the National Medal of Arts, the National Medal of Humanities, to 39 extraordinary Americans and organizations, including Rosetta Roll, an Alaska Native. More than 80 years ago, she was a 6-year-old when she was taken to a federal boarding school. She spent 3 years, her family not known if she'd ever come home. 9 years old, she was one of those who did come home. Over the next 7 decades, she became a leading anthropologist and advocate, building a new era of understanding. Her story, from being taken from her home as a child, to standing in the Oval Office, receiving one of the nation's most consequential medals, is a story of the truth, the power of healing. When Rosetta sees young people singing traditional songs, just like we heard today, she says, and I quote, "We will hear the voices of our ancestors, and we are now hearing it through our children." For too long, this nation sought to silence the voices of generations of Native children. But now, your voices are being heard. That's the America that we should be. That's the American we can all be proud of. That's who we are. For God's sake, let's make sure we reach out and embrace. Because you make us stronger, you are America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Joe. 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 Thank you, Joe.
Oh,
We
yours,
can't
Chuck.
hear. We can't hear you.
Okay. I think that was great. You know, this is a good step toward healing and bringing the communities back to who they are. And I'm glad that he has those proclamation in terms of culture and language, land development. I didn't hear anything about water rights, but I'm pretty sure that's included in the land acquisition. But these are really very, very good things. Now, um, let's continue. And we're way over time, so I'm just going to go through this real quick. I'm going to go and share my screen here and just conclude our meeting today. We're down to the, I know that you guys have a lot more NIE conference experiences. I sure like to hear much more. Maybe our next meeting in November, that would give us an opportunity to spend a little bit more time. But the next part to this, I see the updates. I do have we develop a vision statement. What I wanted to do was to walk through that process. But, because of time, we'll do this in November. And is the Urban Indian Center here today? Do you know? Is there anybody from the Urban Indian Center? I know that they always offer the updates on their part. Penelope, I guess she's not here. And now the other is the Utah grants. And I think, again, I go back to the funding part, the funding source with the description. You will receive two funding sources. One is coming, that one actually, it was sent out a couple weeks ago. And, I looked into the you guys all applied for that. You guys accepted it, and now it's on its way. And the other one should be coming through in another 2 or 3 weeks. It has to go through its channels. Now, I guess basically the question is that the amount is going to probably be about the same as last year. And usually our second bucket usually is a little bit more, a little more than the first. So that's the only other that I have. And the last is our next meeting is November 15th. And we'll reconvene there at that time. I'd like to thank Becky and Madeline for orchestrating this whole thing. And I thank you guys. I didn't know that this presentation this morning by President Biden was going to be on national news. I heard about it, but not where, we will get an opportunity to experience what he said and, how he said it. And, and even seeing some of the community members there. So I think this was a very, very special day for us as American Indians and for those individuals who support the Title VI Indian education and BIE programs. So with that, again, I'd like to thank you guys for this long haul. If there's anybody who would like to say anything before we depart, I appreciate your time. If not, I'll see you November the 15th. Okay, if not, again, hey, thank you for your attendance, and let's keep chugging along. Hey, thanks.